Hello, good afternoon. My name is Jamie Ann Jacobin. I'm the director of the Jane Fromick Alliance for Craft. We're an organization dedicated to the appreciation, education, and connoisseurship of American craft. We say craft a lot. We love it. So today we're all in for a treat. We're going to be hearing the first of our Distinguished Artist Series presentations. So with that, I'm going to be introducing Rebecca Ravenel, who is the president of the board and also the chair of the Distinguished Artist Series. So Rebecca.
Great. Thank you, Jamie Ann, and welcome. And thank you again to everyone for joining us. And I would also like to thank our co-host for these artist talks, the American University Museum at the Katzen Art Center. As Jamie Ann said, this is our first Distinguished Artist Series program for this year. For this series, each season, we invite 4 notable craft artists to give us a Saturday demonstration and a Sunday artist talk. So today we are so pleased to host ceramic figurative sculptor Cristina Córdova for the artist talk. As you will see, Cristina's sculptures are exquisitely wrought. Right away, you feel almost a live connection with her figures, an inkling that they have a full awareness or a soul. And then you find yourself marveling at the extraordinary craftsmanship, the virtuosity that she possesses to bring the clay to life. Cristina's created characters are vessels for her own meaning and emotions, but she and the figures leave room for the viewer to participate in that narrative. To give us an understanding of her narrative and amazing work, please welcome Cristina Córdova.
Thank you, Rebecca and Jamie Ann and Lila and the James Fromick Alliance for having me. So what I want to share with you today is the bird's eye view of my story with clay. A lot of it is grounded in my identity as someone from the Caribbean, and then progresses on to include my experience living in Penland for the last almost 20 years. So let's jump right in. So many of the themes that ground my practice are rooted in the identity of someone from the Caribbean, from Puerto Rico specifically. Amidst all the vantage points that catalyze creativity, this one, time and time again, offers a focused stance from which images of weight emerge in my practice. And specifically, as I think back into this sense of identity, the things that are relevant and persistent are my relationship with religion. I grew up in a very Catholic household, and I dare say a very Catholic country, where religion really wasn't a choice. The rhythms of the year were marked by the rhythms of the Catholic calendar. There were many moments of walking into these sacred spaces and being flooded with a lot of manifestations of sculpture and religious art that definitely seeped into my sense of creativity. There's also a lot of drama. This is what we would call a passion play. And this kind of desensitizing a rawness in how one perceived suffering and martyrdom and even gore. And so all these things are things I continue to draw from in different ways. Another thing that I draw from this identity is this sense of coming from an evergreen environment, an environment where no matter what is happening in your life, you know you can trust that you can look outside and it will always be constant and green. Of course, you know, that is affected by seasons of rain and hurricanes, but for the most part, the variation in the seasons is minimal. And there's something really powerful that establishes in one's sense of being. And by contrast, when I moved to the United States, it was, and in a way it is quite disconcerting to experience seasons and find myself time and time again in these changing environments. The last part, or the third most important part of this identity, is the sense of having existed in a colonial status. Puerto Rico has been a perpetual colony, first under the control of Spain, and then after the Hispano-American War, under the control of the US. And this lack of sovereignty is prevalent in many different ways in my sense of who I am and where I come from. I have a lot of family in Puerto Rico, so I really feel moved and affected by all the twists and turns that come out of this political status or political limbo. And it's not an easy thing to hold space for because, for example, my grandfather served in the war and my mother's family is pro-statehood. And conversely, my father's family was very grounded in more pro-independent ideas. And so when I think about what the next step outside of colonialism is in my ideal mind or in my ideal scenario, it's really hard to know. And so it creates this really powerful and unstable place from which to summon creativity. So my experience with clay started as a junior in my undergraduate studies at the University of Puerto Rico. I took an elective and it was taught by this man, this artist named Jaime Suarez. Jaime is an architect and did a minor in ceramics at Catholic University. And when he came back to Puerto Rico, he essentially jump-started the contemporary ceramics movement in the island. And his sense of scale and his approach to surface, very cathartic, very violent, definitely spoke to me at a moment where I was uncertain about what my primary medium should be. And so once I took that semester with him, I never looked back and felt absolutely grounded in this medium. After that, I went to Alfred University as a special student. I was looking for ways to continue to grow my proficiency in the medium and had felt I had run out of options in Puerto Rico. So I was there for a year and then did a lot of experimenting. In this case, I was just dipping things in slip and combining different hand building approaches. Here you can see the results of that. It's a little horsehair hanging from the side. And then I moved on to my graduate program or into their graduate program after that. And these are some images of my MFA show. I did a minor in the integrated arts department. So I was combining a little bit of robotics and video with sculpture. In this case, I had this saint. There's in the pantheon of Catholic saints, there's one for every need. They're very specific. If you lose something, you pray to one. If you are looking for love, you pray to another. And I wanted to create a dual saint, a saint that could cover all your bases. And so that's what I did on the top. And then the videos had little cuts of things in my daily life that I considered sacred, like my grandmother cooking, or my mom and my grandfather sharing a story. And these videos would play and then they would stop and then the saint would spin, almost like acknowledging that indeed this is sacred, even though it falls outside of the standard dogma. And so I was playing with these ideas. And after that, I applied to the residency in Penland. That's what brought me to North Carolina. This residency was unique in that it offered 3 years to really mediate that transition between the bubble of graduate school and the reality of being a full-time studio artist. And after that, there was a small property adjacent to the school that I was able to move into and set up my studio. And my home is right underneath the studio. So during that period of time, those first years after my residency, they were moments of like furious making. I just wanted to assert myself as a maker, be able to make a living, support my family. So it was very freeing in a way. There wasn't a lot of questioning. There was just a lot of doing. It was show after show, exploring different surfaces, different formats, of course, everything within the context of figuration. But throughout this process, throughout this period, certain themes start to emerge. I think this idea of what is beautiful. So this thin line between attraction and repulsion, or holding space for an image that might not be beautiful in a standard, easy way. Also, this idea of the vessel, the boat, and through that, the idea of transience and displacement, like you see here. I also started to have creatures accompany the figures, thinking about the duality of the human experience, so not so much as two separate entities, but the combination of the reasonable, or the reason, and the instinct that coalesce to create a state of being or acting. And again, exploring surfaces, many glaze explorations and surface explorations to try to find voice through not only the formal aspect of clay, but also that subsequent surface treatment. This is called el abrazo, the embrace. So again, questioning, what is beautiful, and can something be hard to look at and powerful in a way that's almost brinking on being off-putting, and still hold or take you into a space of beauty and appreciation, and just trying to understand and question those boundaries and those margins. It's called Beautiful Shipwreck. So at some point, I was offered the opportunity to exhibit in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Puerto Rico, and I went to visit the space and was incredibly excited, and also incredibly overwhelmed by how big the space was, and the fact that for me to continue at the scale that I had been working on up to that point would mean that I would need 50 pieces to fill that space. And so that was the first time that I felt compelled to really think about scale. And this is around the time I first started using paper clay. So these are some of those initial discoveries that led me to a lot of the strategies that I still use in my practice today, mostly slab building onto fairly simple armatures, and building in parts and then stacking to create larger compositions. So this is some of the work that I was doing. Everything came apart so that it could be shipped. Figuring out different ways of rigging and keeping these things together as they dried. And this was the exhibition. It was called Entre Tierra, in Between Lands. And it was divided in 3 rooms. The first room had work that was in alignment with the scale that I had been working on, so breath-sized work. And this was the first piece called Las Negras, and it was an alignment of Black figures where one would continue the movement of the other, almost like an archaic animation. And so it was an exploration of content through shifts in gesture. I was really interested in showing how a figure, the same figure essentially in one pose, could be speaking about something sensual or evoking something very soft, and then 3 down, it could be turning into something more uncomfortable and almost like feral, and then on and on. And across from that was this piece where these figures were throwing these spheres, or you could see kind of like the path, the progress of the path of these spheres moving from one figure to the next. And it was this idea of communication, of how, we essentially infuse our words with a specific message, and once they enter the realm or the psychic realm of someone else, they really assume their color. So the balls, the spheres would change color as they came close to a figure, except for a couple. And so loosely playing with these notions and these observations of concepts through these forms, these formal studies. And then you would enter into the second space where these figures were life-size. So your sense of how you're relating to the sculpture, my intention was that it would shift. So you would go from something that's more in the realm of being figurine-ish, and then you would go into something that's more self-referential because it's akin to your own scale. And these figures were perched on these platforms that were interconnected and they were spinning. So it was like an odd choreography of sorts where you would move around the room and the figures would kind of follow you in the slow spin. And, you know, after being with them, other things were evoked, such as light, like the lighthouse spinning, or even like a surveillance device that's just following you around. And then the last room was kind of the hyperbolic room where everything was blown out of proportion. It's hard to gauge the scale, but the figure in the back at its top is about 9.5 feet tall. So all these figures were quite large. The figures, the flanking figures at the highest point were about 11 feet tall. And the idea was that you would walk into this space and felt dwarfed. So you would go from, you know, feeling this ongoing shift of scale affecting your sense of your own body. These were close-ups. This figure was a large head on this abstracted cart that was welded, and it's the witness to this drama. These two figures were trapped in this game of dodgeball, and my idea was that you would come and you would sit in that big red ball and just look all around. And then the figure in the back is the namesake for the exhibition, and this figure was oozing these black balloons. Black balloons were ceramic, and these balloons would meander across all three spaces. So you can see here some influences. I was dipping deep into the realm of magic realism, which is a Latin American literary genre, also influenced by Japanese surrealist artists, Miyazaki, different movies that appealed to that sensibility. And then at some point, soon after that, I felt I had run that well dry, and I needed to find more specific aspects in my culture, place Puerto Rican, to ground my work. And so I kept coming back to the island, and I kept understanding something about the vulnerability of the culture. Things would disappear, things would become inaccessible to me, things that I felt I needed to replenish my sense of who I was and continue or create that sense of continuity with my life experience. And so I started to think of some formal representation that could tap into that. And this piece is called El Rey. It's made from discarded material from Puerto Rico, and it has these shiny components that are made out of the national beer can, Medalla, which I had gathered in Puerto Rico, shipped here, and we cut apart, and I used them to laminate these little bits of wood. And it also has some barn wood from a nearby barn in Penland. And to me, El Rey invokes both the struggle of Puerto Rico's marginalized populations and their worth, suggesting through his densely layered coat a priceless cultural richness, despite a lack of more standard signifiers of wealth. The king shrouds himself in found materials. And to me, it felt like it was the act of collecting these materials felt in itself as an offering, and almost like a way of finding things that had been misunderstood or misplaced in my experience of returning home time and time again. So I felt that from accepting this experience that had become quite whitewashed, this piece kind of forced me to look into the harder parts of the fringes of my culture, and specifically of the realities of the metro area in San Juan, and come to terms with the fact that I needed to be more careful in how I was recording my experience as a Puerto Rican. So I couldn't just take what was given. I had to actually go in and seek things that were omitted or shrouded or camouflaged, so that I could really understand the depth of this experience. I was forgetting essentially what it was to be a Puerto Rican. It was becoming just this secondhand, shallow experience. So this piece for me spoke to that. And then this piece is of the same series. It's called Mosca, which means fly. And it was, playing on the idea of a dead fly. Again, collected materials from Puerto Rico, North Carolina, and the likes of ceramic. So I've also done a number of pieces that I would consider more decorative or playing on traditional ideas of ornamentation, and just using that as an in to speak to something more psychological, but still holding that sense of taking that ornament as a point of departure. So in this case, I was using these small pear tree buds and then using them to recover this form that created an arc. And then through subsequent surface development, this rhythmic application of these components became something a lot more charged and almost like barnacle-like, and just continue to evolve and step away from that original sense of it being this flower, this bud. And so, yeah, taking this idea of the ornament and breaking it down and transforming it into something that's a little bit more visceral, that has a little bit more of an emotional resonance. So it's no longer just about rhythm and balance. It's about something a little bit more psychological. I think, as soon as you combine anything with figurative component, there's the story that starts to emanate, where these two aspects of the composition, the abstract aspect and the figurative aspect, start to speak to each other. And I was really captivated by that. Like, how can I find this synergy between both so that they can both coexist without one overpowering the other? Being in a craft school environment, I am at the crosswinds of many different mediums, and oftentimes I would see artists working with textiles or metals or concrete, and I would feel very moved to try my hand at that. And so this is an example of some of the pieces that I've done that have been influenced by just being in such a effervescent space or effervescent place for making. This is another example where I did a collaboration with my friend Martin Janeski at the Penland Hot Shop, made some sketches, and he created some hand sculpted glass components that I would then bring to my studio and create figurative riders to go along with, and I would match the surface. This is another iteration of this idea that I'd mentioned before about the vessel, the boat, a space for transience and transformation. Also, this idea of displacement. This is called the flight of the superheroes. And then at some point, after almost a decade of quite furious making, I started to feel that I needed to bring some balance to my practice. And so I started to turn towards teaching as a way to share everything that I had accumulated and also nourish myself and bring a little bit more levity to this practice that had become quite dense and heavy. And so I started to go to Puerto Rico and organize these workshops with the community there, and also opening them up for people from the United States and abroad to come and experience, the wonderful creative environment in Puerto Rico. So these would happen in the Museum of Contemporary Art. And since then, I've done them in many different spaces. I have been doing this for the past 15 years and continue to do it. And it's a big passion project of mine. So this is an example of Buto dance. I'm not always researching work very specifically. I would say that for the most part, my research period is a space where I bombard myself with different images and then see what rises to the top. And the result of what emerges is pretty much an accumulation of everything that has surfaced and hybrids of those things. But in this case, I was really taken aback by just this practice of Buto dancing, which was a style of dancing that emerged as a reaction of World War II, as a reaction to World War II by an artist called Katsuo Ono. And I was really captivated by the use of the body in this dance. It was a type of dance that fell, or movement that fell outside of the coded spectrum of behavior that one would use a body to activate in our civilized environment. So these movements were animalesque, were almost like the movements of someone that didn't fully understand the boundaries of the body, almost like a child that was learning how to interpret that nervous system as it relates to their limbs and their face and their neck. And so what I would experience was so refreshing to me, because when you're working within the context of the encoded gestural language, even with my background as a dancer, I felt that sometimes I kept falling into these ruts where I would find less and less space to be ambiguous or mysterious or non-specific about what I was trying to express through my gesturing. And then I found this, and it kind of like revitalized, this sense of the figure being able to channel much more than what we assume, and maybe move outside of the spaces or the boundaries of gesture that I had set up for myself. And so with that in mind, I started to embark on this new cycle of work. And to me, the impact of Buto dance carried not only to the gestures, but also to the surfaces. Like it really reconnected me to this idea of finding beauty in something that is crude and maybe off-putting and maybe inaccessible in terms of what it's trying to state. I think, again, in the realm of the figure, we expect to understand, like we are, as humans, we seek patterns, we seek to find recognition within those patterns. That's what gives us grounding. That's what makes us feel interconnected. And so I'm really interested in creating attention by falling outside of those boundaries and offering that as a space to reinterpret notions about our existence, our reality in this world, where not everything should be, and not everything is clear. This piece is called Isla, and this is one of the first pieces where I coined the term Isla. Aside from having grown up as an islander, I'm drawn to the simple construction of the word and its iconic dimension that speaks of something delineated, containment of sorts, a containment that sits amidst an intractable context of history and in the middle of an ocean. So I'm really drawn to that idea of isla as a word and also as just a simple symbol. This is some images of the construction of that piece and the installation. And this piece has two versions. It's the first version is this one. During this period of time, there was an arson event in my town, in the town next to where I live. And this left this stunning wall. And it was this combination of feelings because nobody really could understand how something like this could happen in such a small town. And yet I knew that this was going to be rebuilt soon. And I really felt compelled to put this piece against this wall. So I asked for permission, and for one day I was allowed to set it up. And then it moved to its second version in the Mint Museum, where it sits in a very different environment. It's completely white. So it moves from something that was activated in this way to a space that is absolutely quiet and serene. And I really appreciate having able to experience this piece in those two settings. So this piece is called Preludios and Partidas, and it's a metaphorical landscape, one of transitions where the figures are in veering states before a great action. So veering states like preludios, like preparing for a big shift before a great action, which is partidas or departures, and specifically translated. Common to the human experience are profound shifts where the ground gives way and one is thrust into powerful periods of self-reflection, growth, and renewed vision. This is how the space looks in my mind, a place of open possibilities and regeneration. These are other pieces. This is called Self-Portrait as a Man in the Night. This piece is called Colonia. This piece is called Quemamen. So up to this point, most of my work, the surfaces were activated, but the colors were quite subdued. I kept feeling called to color and pattern very viscerally. And after starting to collaborate with my friend, Jason Burnett, who was working with screen printing inks, ceramic inks onto newsprint and using those as ways to bring pattern and color onto ceramic surfaces, I began to see that as a way into color and pattern. These are hydraulic cement tiles from San Juan. This is an example of razzle dazzle camo, which was an approach used around the near World War I to not camouflage the boats clearly, but to confuse range so that it would be hard to be specific and precise. And a lot of ships were covered with these insane patterns, and that also migrated into pop culture. But I was really captivated by this idea of spending a lot of time and care articulating forms and then bombarding them with really aggressive graphic information that would confuse and almost resist the deciphering of the forms, creating this tension, in essence, camouflaging different aspects or facets of the sculpture. So this is some of the example of the work that I was doing. And so my idea was that the piece at a distance would reveal itself or propose itself as being of a certain, or being sculpted in a certain way. And as you got closer, you could start to understand different planes that were perceived as volumetric are actually flat, and essentially would keep revealing itself as you got closer and as you were able to walk around it. And that process of discovery really interested me. I was also very captivated by resurgence of graffiti in the metro area in San Juan, this idea of these like vast drawings on really beautiful, dirty urban walls. And so I came back and I was looking for a way to maybe speak to that inside of me. And I started mixing ceramic pigments with inks and glues and binders, and experimenting with this type of drawing. And just really capitalizing on the qualities that I appreciated in clay, you know, this just the way it drips, the way it marks, the way you can move it around almost like volumetric finger paint, and just really trying to bring those elements together to explore 2D pieces with a medium that I felt I had some sort of history with. I felt very resistant to dropping clay. So these drawings were only possible through the integration of those clay pigments and the charcoal and inks. But I really felt I needed that material as a bridge. So just use of my studio, some of my tools. Wanted to give you a little insight of my building strategy. I work mostly I make hollow pieces through slab build construction. I also build solid for smaller pieces, but at this scale, this is how I would go about building a sculpture. I normally have a photographic blueprint printed to scale that I work with and take measurements from. So normally the figures are a starting point to something that moves beyond the figure. So I make the figure, I spend a lot of time on the figurative components, and then I look to create context through tiles, through surface, of course, through the addition of foliage, like in this piece called Balcón. This is an example of how I would pack some, if you're wondering. Or through the inclusion of backgrounds, photographic backgrounds that create a sort of diorama, a sort of imaginary diorama, where I'm taking something that is sculpted from reality, and I'm taking an image that is in the world somewhere, and I'm combining them and forcing a new relationship. I'm gonna give you more shots of work in progress. And then this is the finished piece called Jungla. I have a little note here on Jungla. It speaks to the open metaphor of raw power in transition, of mysterious and even dangerous native undercurrents, of love of what can be fully understood through the standard ideologies. This is one of the largest pieces I've done. It's called Dame Flores. And it's a large bust that sits in front of a printed collage of Puerto Rican flowers. Each flower was photographed, printed, cut, and assembled before scanning the collage to create a backdrop. It's a collection of time spent to uphold remembrance. It expresses the longing and wanting of the displaced body, seeking vibrant echoes of its native culture and landscape. Species called Come Coco, translates to eat coconut, is inspired by the phrase, let them eat cake, supposedly spoken by Marie Antoinette upon being told that the peasants had no bread. Eat coconut refers to the disregard for the plight of the poor and disenfranchised in the Caribbean by sovereign forces, custodians of the island's future. And in this case, it's probably one of the only times where I've used my oldest daughter, Paloma, as a model. So last year I embarked on a project to write a book about figurative construction. And this was the piece that I documented throughout that process. And I have continued to sculpt my daughter Eva since she was about 9. Well, the first sculpture, she was younger, but they weren't full size, full body renderings. So full body renderings since she was around 9. And this is the 8th version of Eva. It's Eva at age 15. And it's called Cosmología Isleña. read a little bit to you about this piece because to me it was a kind of a critical part of this ongoing series. It was a part that matched a key moment in Eva's life. And it also, I think, aligned itself with a powerful shift that I was experiencing as it related to my homeland. So theological cosmologies explain the origin, evolution, and destiny of the universe through the lens of a specific religion or culture. It is deities who are the center of these stories, embodying qualities that resonate with the community's shared history and helping them make sense of the world. Cosmología Isleña imagines such a deity amidst an astronomical expanse, a symbol of hope and empowerment intended to counter the undercurrents of a nation's collective trauma. Many elements of the sculpture would be immediately recognizable to Puerto Ricans, specifically and Caribbean residents broadly. I am speaking to the people who are of this place. Those recognizable elements include the plantain, a complex and long-standing symbol of masculinity, race, and class, the baule African mudcloth patterned skirt, symbolizing the cultural impact of slavery embedded in daily life, and the runny light color glaze representing the European impact across the Caribbean. COVID brought to my realm this, as I'm sure it did to many artistic realms, this desire to find an outlet for big feelings. And so inevitably the work grew and in a way became large in scale, but more open in specificity, more archetypal. And so this is some of the work that I have been doing since then. So moving like pivoting away from the specificity of naturalism and finding another outlet to hold space for these big ideas that question everything about our lives and our future. And these are smaller pieces that I have been working on, combining them with steel elements. They are about 30 to 36 inches in size, this one in width in particular. And they refer to the fact that Caribbean architecture is dominated by a lot of these decorative gates. And while aesthetic and protective, they also enclose their inhabitants and create a sense of being caged in. In this piece, a black nude both lures and observes behind the steel screen, comprised of a rhythmic pattern of sankofa. This pattern, it's like double loop pattern, is specific to Ghana, and it means to retrieve. And this is the most recent iteration of my series, my ongoing series, where I've used my daughter Eva as a model. It's called Eva 15, and it's life size. And in the back, it says De Monte y Mar. And it's covered by, it's not glazed, and it's covered by burnished pigments from the island, mixed with casein, lime, and oxides, which is the first time I've attempted this type of surface. They come specifically from two parts of the island, or two areas in the island, one in Fajardo near the coast, and one in Orocovis in the mountains in the center, in the Cordillera Central. On the back, like I mentioned, says De Monte y Mar, from mountain and sea. And this is written in gold. And this is a phrase from a song by El Topo, or Antonio Cabal Vale, called Verde Luz, which became a symbol of national Puerto Rican pride and sort of an anti-colonialist anthem. In my practice, the image of Eva, to me, embodies change and possibility, and it speaks to the inevitability of transience and the inherited threads of information that perpetuate both her physicality, but also her sense of identity. This is a piece that seeks to perform as a symbol, but also as a relic, because it's holding in its materiality part of the island that has thematically bound the whole series through the last years, exploring the riches and the vulnerabilities of this island nation that I consider home. Thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you. Gosh, we do have a couple of questions, but I just have to say, I'm speaking for myself and maybe others feel this, but there was so much gorgeous visual content and fascinating intellectual commentary. It was like the equivalent of like you putting the most luscious chocolate cake in front of all of us. And we're so busy taking in all the deliciousness of the experience that it was really hard to break the spell to come up with anything to say or ask. But we do have a couple of questions, which we'll start with. And then as those are being answered, maybe people will think of more. Jamie Ann, actually, maybe you've been monitoring a little more closely. Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. There's actually a lot of questions in the chat.
Okay.
We had one about technique from Linda, and we're so sorry you missed us yesterday, Linda. I'm going to talk about some of the, I guess, more conceptual questions. One that came in was about doing sculptures about your daughter and how you feel about that, or if that changes because the subject is so close to you, if that changes your opinion when making work.
Yes, I love that question. So I started sculpting Eva in a period of my really stuck. And it was really, I felt that I had overworked that part of my brain that gushed creativity, and I needed to replenish, and I wasn't careful enough. And so I had really run into a space where everything became very hard. And so I was looking for the easiest way to get back into a practice. And I felt that this channel that I have with this child, it changes, of course, with every parent-child relationship. But in this case, I had such a beautiful, gentle connection with this child, and she was so excited. Like, I proposed this, at dinner time, and it felt like, okay, I can do this, and maybe use that as a way to get back into this practice and bring new wind into my sails. And so I didn't have a big agenda. I wasn't looking to speak about being a mother. I just wanted to find a way to be able to sit in the studio for a couple hours at a time and get back into flow, essentially. And so from there, it became our thing. And so it became something that we kept doing year after year. And if we didn't do it, because during COVID, I don't think we did it, she would miss it, because it was not only like a way to experience this process together, but also like a way to spend time together. And so it was, this gift that just happened, that started from a point of need and sincere search. And now, it's been since she was 7, and she's, it's been 8 years of doing this. So yeah. And it is interesting, now she's 15. So now when I bring her into the studio, she's not a little girl. I have assistants. It becomes something more public, and I think more vulnerable. So I'm always looking to her to make sure she's feeling comfortable and game. And time again, I'm surprised by the fact that she's like, okay, let's go, Mom.
Great. I'm going to ask a few more in here, and then Rebecca, feel free to chime in. So one of the questions we received was about the faces and the expression of those faces on your work. So can you talk a little bit about that? And is that usually the focus or the hardest part, the easiest part when you're thinking about a work and then also executing the work?
So I've been asked about this before. The best way I can come up with to explain this is that I'm looking to create or sculpt the semblance of a face that has some profound internal activity happening inside. And so I don't want to charge the face with any specific gesture. Like, I don't want to have it be very expressive. I don't want there to be like an enacted moment where whatever is happening inside is so clear that you can see it as a smile or as a frown. I want there to be ambiguity, but I want there to be a sense that because this figure is just maybe entranced or captured by something that is happening on the inside, that you have to use that as an entry point to decipher and fill in through your imagination what that could be based on what that would mean for you. Like like when you assume the stance of the figure and you assume that face, like what could be happening inside. And so that's something that I think about every time I try to migrate some of that energy into the expression of the face. The whole thing kind of deflates for me a little bit. And so I do believe more in activating the hands, maybe some components of the body, but the face usually stays very neutral.
That's interesting. We'll move on to the next question for now. There were some really very nice comments about people who've been following your career for a long time, and kind of talking about how you've been an inspiration to them. And I wonder how it's been for you in terms of teaching and maybe keeping in touch with some of those students and seeing the progression of both your work and then maybe your teacher's work and your students' work. I think there's a really nice lineage there. And could you speak a little bit to that?
Yes, that's a great question, because when I came into the field, very few people were working with a figure. And I started working more formally in Alfred, and Doug Jack, who just recently passed away, had just been there. And everybody kept telling me, oh, you need to go find Doug Jack because he's the one that could really support this work. But aside from him and some of the folks that had been working on the West Coast, like Arneson and Viola Frey and that whole generation, I felt that there was very little to draw from. And so it was a lot of, my strategy of hand building was drawn from a demo that John Gill, who is this amazing functional potter, did to create a teapot. And he was using slabs and cutting and darting and resetting and changing the axis of this form. And that's how I started to understand, oh, I can migrate a lot of these techniques that I'm seeing around me to use them as strategies to build figures. And so for me, it was like and then I went to Florence and compounded that strategy with traditional figurative modeling. And so it was this slow process of gathering things from different places and then passing them on, and then seeing how people continue to compound, those strategies and come up with different approaches. And so the landscape as it relates to figurative sculpture and ceramics is so rich and wonderful. And I look back, at the people that I was inspired by, and I'm so grateful, but I feel that what has been done with all that information has just continued to become richer and richer and much more exciting and diverse. So yeah, it's really great to feel that in some way I was a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I put a link to the current exhibition at the Clay Studio. And there's a lot of artists of different ages and backgrounds all working with the figure. And
Yes, that's such a great example. And it's funny because I was there and it was like the first time that I'm like, I'm kind of like an elder. I think I'm like the second to oldest person here in this show. And that was like this shift in my mind, like, okay.
I don't know how I feel about that. Right. That's funny. Well, I don't want to keep people too long, so I'm not going to be able to get to all questions, but there is one more question I think we can get to, and then I'll ask Rebecca to say a few final words. And that last question is, what do you have coming up? I know you talked a little bit about an exhibition yesterday. Maybe you can tell people today, and where are you seeing your work going now?
So you saw those larger pieces that came from COVID. I'm really excited about those. They're big, and there's something about that monolithic scale that definitely is calling to me. So I'm hoping that I can keep preparing my studio to handle that. I jumped right into that and then realized like I had just half of the equipment that I needed. So I haven't been able to move the work because I can fire it and glaze it, but I need to move it too. So I'm working on that. And then I'm more and more impassioned by the community of artists in Puerto Rico and supporting them. I feel Puerto Rico has been through the ringer, and as you can tell from my presentation, I'm very invested in everything that's happening there. And so I've been working with a group of women to facilitate this dialogue between European and American artists and local artists there. So I'm organizing the first of those next May in conjunction with an exhibition in Old San Juan. So if you want to take a great little vacation, Old San Juan is beautiful. It's a little hot in May, but you should go. I have information about that show in my website and social media. So that's what's coming up this year for me.
Great. Well, I wrote it down. Maybe we'll all take a trip there. I would love that.
Yeah.
So Rebecca, if you could say a few final words.
Sure. So first of all, we didn't get to the answer the questions today about your technique and all that, because we really covered a lot of it yesterday. But also, you do have some teaching videos available on Teachable and another platform or two, and you have a book. So I just wanted to mention that if people really want to do a dive into Cristina's technique, there are ways to do that. So, wow, this has been an amazing first DAS event for us, and I really thank you for all your commentary today. It was fascinating, and thank you to everybody for attending. And we have 3 more Distinguished Artist Series speakers coming. For more information on that, you can go to JRA.org, and those will be those artists will be coming to DC in person, but we will hopefully also be able to live stream their artist talk. So for full information on that, do go to our website. And thank you so much to you, Cristina. We really appreciated that. And we hope to see everyone back here again.
My pleasure. Thank you both so much. And thank you all for being here.